I will talk about the viewpoint from Amsterdam and how they looked at Sephardim in Eastern Europe. First of all, the question, were there Sephardim in Eastern Europe? And yes, there were. One of the more famous examples is the one in Zamość, started by a local ruler who invited Italian Jews to come to his city. And this was in 1586. And during the lifetime of that ruler, they were able to build this synagogue. There are some lists preserved. I have here 70 names, but there are actually some 39 names. And if you look at these names, most of them are from Italy, Venice, and Italy larger. And some of Constantinople and Turkey, and one from Spain, one from Portugal. I hesitate to name this Sephardic community because Italian Jews are a category all of their own. And the 16th century in Italy was such a melting pot that nobody knows to which identity he belonged. Sephardic, Italian, Romaniot, or Ashkenazic. So there are people who claim to descend from one of these people, but I haven't seen any conclusive evidence for that. But who knows in the future. The other Jewish Sephardic community that existed in Eastern Europe and Poland was the one in Gdansk. There are early modern notarial deeds from Amsterdam that mention trade on Danzig, in which Portuguese Jews were involved. As far as I can see, there was one Portuguese Jew, Francisco Dias Nunes, who lived permanently in Gdansk for some time between 1618 and 1624. After that, the trade with Danzig slowed down, possibly because of the 30 Years' War. Then a second Sephardic community in Danzig or Gdansk existed circa 1651, and they were betrayed to the Spanish Inquisition in Madrid by Samuel Boab or Francisco Domingo Guzman. If there ever was an adventurous life, it was his. He came from Jerusalem to Amsterdam and then traveled the known Sephardic world from the south of France to Danzig, doing Amsterdam in between France, London, and other communities in Germany. You see here a list of indeed Sephardic names: Espinosa, Suarez Nunez, Lobo, Saraiva, all genuine Sephardic names. And the Guzman tells of them that they were Portuguese in origin, that they were merchants, and that they congregated in the house of one member of this community. A few years later, we hear nothing anymore about this community. I think it dispersed, and there are no Polish people who claim descendants of any of these names, probably because no one has ever seen them before. My argument here is that this is really a merchant community, driving trade with other countries, and much along the lines of the Portuguese community of Antwerp, who are also not allowed to be outwardly Sephardic. Uh, Gdansk as well forbade Jews to congregate and actually allowed no Jews at all. So these people had to uh, convince them that they were not Jews but Portuguese merchants. Then I have to tell something about Sephardim and Ashkenazim in Amsterdam in order to understand the next slides. Actually, it was an Ashkenazi rabbi who was flown in to teach the first Portuguese merchants in Amsterdam, to teach them about their Jewish origins and to relearn Judaism. At first, Ashkenazim were welcome in Amsterdam until circa the 1630s, and there were even a few Ashkenazim buried at at Bet Chaim. There, and then there were too many Ashkenazim arriving in Amsterdam. So the Portuguese Jews drew boundaries and they forbade Ashkenazim to be buried in Bet Chaim. They didn't forbid them from attending synagogue, but they were not allowed at the seated places. The Portuguese community helped them with poor relief. There's one list of poor Amsterdam Ashkenazim helped by the Sephardim, and the scribe tells proudly that they went around the city in 1641 to find every Ashkenazi Jew they could find. And they went around the city 3 times to miss no one. There were collections for Poland. One of them raised no less than 3,300 guilders. This was 1656. They gave help to emissaries from Eastern Europe. And they had a special charity, Gemelut Hasidim, the proceeds of which went to Ashkenazim, but in 1670 they took that to themselves. There were differences. Portuguese Jews felt closer aligned to Amsterdam non-Jews, especially the elite, and especially the Portuguese Jewish merchants, were closer to the Amsterdam rich than to their poor Ashkenazim brothers. In general, Sephardim were richer, Ashkenazim poorer. But I think that's a classic picture that needs some refinement, because half of the Sephardim was poor, and there was a rich Ashkenazic upper layer. But the fact that Sephardim in general were richer produced a clear social hierarchy in which Portuguese Jews looked a little bit down on Ashkenazim, and Ashkenazim looked up. One of the boundaries that was erected was that marriage between Sephardim and Ashkenazim was forbidden, and this was the case until 1810. I looked at Dutch marriage bans. There is a database that's on the Amsterdam Aangevod website, or Dutch Jewry. And it's also on genie.com in the meantime. And I counted the place where people came from and made a list of countries and largest cities where they came from. And of course, there were a lot of people coming from Amsterdam. But in this category, there are also unknowns, because The database does not tell you if someone is from Amsterdam, although in the marriage ban it says from Amsterdam. And this has to do with insufficient computer memory in the early days of computer genealogy. This was database dates from 1990. So in order to reduce memory, they chose to not mention Amsterdam. But there are also people where it also does not say the origin and does not say from Amsterdam. So there are some unknowns here. And then, not unsurprisingly, there are large categories from Portugal and Spain, but also a lot of people from France, Italy, the German states. And I'm convinced that these people mostly came from Portugal and Spain, but by way of France, by way of Italy, by way of Hamburg, and by way of London. When we go down the list, the numbers get smaller and smaller. There's Southeast Europe and the Levant. And the closest place name for the men is Belgrado. And the others are Skopje, Constantinople, Turkey. And some people came from Eretz Israel even. And then there were a few people from Gibraltar, Ireland, Angola. And what we are missing here is Eastern Europe. No one of the men came from Poland, Lithuania, Russia. For the women, it's the same. Dutch Republic, Portugal, Spain, France, Southeastern Europe, one from Eretz Israel, one from Mid-Europe, and that was Prague. But none from Poland, Russia, Lithuania, or any of the other Baltic states. None from Gdansk, none from Zamość. So from the viewpoint of marriage bans and from the Sephardim in Amsterdam, no one that came from Eastern Europe was allowed to marry Sephardic. They all married as Ashkenazi Jews. And you can check that on with later lists with the Kittibot, which begin in 1673. And there you see almost no Eastern Europe names in the Kittibot for women or men. A few women, yes, but then you can't see if they are indeed from Eastern Europe or from Germany or Southeast Europe, etc. Next, I looked at the Despachos from Amsterdam and where they went. Most of them have been counted by Tirza Levi Bernfeld. I used her database, and the rest I took from a database that was put together by Ali Ergensoy. And this is broken up by destination, but the last column, 1598 to 1812, has all the countries of origin, the countries of destination for the despachos from Amsterdam. The despachos were poor people who were given money to migrate elsewhere. Sometimes big money, sometimes a few guilders for the voyage. And here we see 3 people who were sent to Poland. And I found 2 more that Tirza Levi Bernfeld didn't see. And their names are partly Sephardic and partly I don't know. But that's 3 heads of households out of 60 6,390 people. That's negligible. And there may be special reasons why they did want to go to Poland and why they received money from the Mahamat for doing so. So, from the viewpoint of the Sephardim of Amsterdam, there were no Sephardim from Eastern Europe married in Amsterdam, and almost no Sephardim were sent to Eastern Europe. And the explanation can be quite simple. There were no Sephardim in Eastern Europe, and there were no recognized Sephardic communities in Eastern Europe that could accommodate Despachos from Amsterdam, because the Mahamat only sent Despachos to communities where there were Sephardic Jews. And that's it.
David, are you entertaining any questions at this point, or are you going to wait till the end?
Wait to the end, I think.
Okay.
Well, I don't know. We can be flexible.
As you wish.
Yeah.
I just wanted to do a definitional question. When we talk about Sephardim in this context, Han, we're talking about new Christians, yes? New Christian converts.
Mostly, yes, but there were also Sephardim who came from the Eastern diaspora, from Eretz Israel, from Constantinople, from Turkey. There were those who came from Italy, of whom we do not know if they were Sephardic or not. And there were those who fled to Morocco and came from Morocco to Holland. The Palash family is a prime example. They were never new Christian. But the number of new Christians here is small. But they were all from Portugal or Spain. That's
So no, you mean, so the number of new Christians was actually dominant. I think the number who came, right? Okay.
That's it.
Yep.
Okay, ready for me? I'm going to share and jump in. So the question is, if there are no, everybody see that? Is that fine?
Yes.
Yeah. So if there are no Jewish communities, or recognizable Jewish communities with Sephardim in Eastern Europe, why do so many Eastern Europeans claim they descend from Sephardic families? If you scratch a Lithuanian, about 50% of them think that they have some Sephardic ancestry, even though, as Ton just pointed out, there's no evidence for any contact with any Sephardic communities or even sending people there. So how did that happen? Well, the absence of a community doesn't include necessarily that a number of Sephardic people went into Eastern Europe and melded in. And so there's always been this possibility, sort of tantalizing possibility for people. Before I get into it, there's a very good book that I recommend by Professor John Ephron of Berkeley called The Allure of the Sephardic. And his thesis is that it was the Germans who first became interested in writing history in the early 19th century, who then inspired German Jews to come up with some of their history. And looking at their history, those German Jews wanted to find examples of previous Jewish communities that had sort of high-level people and free rights and things, and they developed a sort of myth about Sephardic Jews, so Spanish Jews before the Inquisition, that they were all relatively well off and they were princes and had no problems. Not exactly true, but that became sort of a prevailing myth through this early historiography. And from that, you then see a number of instances where Jews are sort of trying to incorporate that then into their Eastern European story. So I'm going to talk about some of those. One that I really thought could be true, by the way, but we did a DNA test of a putative paternal line descendant, and it came up standard Ashkenaz. Comes from the memoirs of Asher Levy of Reichshofen in Germany, and he gives information about his family and says his great-grandfather Jacob was an exile from Spain, Sepharad, it says very clearly at the bottom of the Hebrew there. So we thought that that was at least a possible Sephardic Jew who came into Germany, but as I said, the paternal line descendant didn't bear out, unfortunately. So that one we thought might be true. Here's an example of how some of the myths evolved. There was a guy named Fisher, Marcus Fisher in Prague, who wanted to impress Rabbi Eliezer Fleckelus, who was sort of a conservative rabbi in Prague in the beginning of the 1800s. And Rabbi Fleckelus had in his ancestry some people named Ramshak, so this is known as the Ramshak Chronicle. Marcus Fisher created a forged history chronicle. It was only exposed 100 years later, and so for about 100 years, people considered this chronicle true. And in that, he included a section on in 1441, we find a Portuguese Jew as a separate colony in Prague, right? So this is probably written around 1820, something like that, and it's the first example I could find of this sort of myth of a Sephardi family in Prague or in Central or Eastern Europe. But as I said, it was exposed by Solomon Lieben as a forgery 100 years later. In 1856, there's the first attempt at cataloging the cemetery in Prague by Koppelman Lieben, and it's published under the name Gal Ed in 1856. And in that, he includes, as far as I can tell, a completely invented story that this grave from 1709, Moses Chaim, the son of Lazer, son of Todros, was a descendant of a new Christian, right? So someone forcibly converted Christianity. There's just no basis for this, but I think it comes out of that same effort to try to sort of add some Sephardi background into the community in Prague. But because of that, anytime you see the reason for it, by the way, is there is a famous Rabbi Todros in Spain, right? So the name Todros, like Theodore, comes up all over the place, including in Prague, and so they just assumed that a Todros in Prague must be related to the Todros back in Spain, which I think is a big leap. Here we have in 1847, around the same time, first attempt at a index of the cemetery, the old Jewish cemetery in Vienna. And he includes the grave of Isaac Halfan, who at the end of it says, an exile from Hispanian in German. And you can see I sort of tried to highlight Sepharad there in there. So in 1847, Ludwig August Frankel says this grave says he's from Sepharad. It turns out it's corrected in 1912 by Bernard Wachstein, who does a complete inventory of the old cemetery, that it says Sarfat. So it's France, that the family was exiled from France. Now you'll find a lot of people in the non-Ashkenaz community in the Levant named Halfan, and they presume that Halfan is a Sephardi name. The family came from France. It appears later in the Egypt and other areas in the Levant. So it's probably this French family that came down into Italy. I'm a descendant of this family also, so it's hence my interest in it. But Halfan is a name that you find earliest in this Italian French exile family, and then in Metz in France and in Vienna, there are two different families named Halfan. So one of the more famous mythological Sephardic families is the Horowitz family in Prague, and Rabbi Marmerstein and I did a long investigation into this to try to find out where the source was. Very interestingly, there's an early genealogy for the Horowitz family that's published in 1701. It includes an ethical will of Rabbi Sheftai Halevi Horowitz, who died in 1660. And he says, he's talking to his son, I want to tell you, I'm the descendant of X, Y, and Z. And he goes through his genealogy and makes no mention of any exile from Spain. So this is a genealogy published by a very respected, very famous rabbi from the Horowitz family, living in the 1600s in Prague. There's no mention of any connection to Spain. So how did this myth arise? Well, there was a descendant of the Horowitz family living in Eastern Europe named Joseph Levenstein in Sirach, and he was a sort of an amateur genealogist, interested in his family, and his son in 1883 published an article saying that his father had determined that the family descended from the Halevi family in Spain. And this got picked up. You can actually watch it it's almost like the current social media environment where it gets sort of shared, click, 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 click. It gets shared from one story to the next. So people just love the story, and it just spreads like wildfire all throughout Eastern Europe because the Horowitz family, a rabbinic family, it's a big deal. They have a lot of descendants all over the place in Eastern Europe, and everyone starts thinking that they're Sephardic from this. It's completely invented, obviously, and you can see a little bit here's the article from 1883 where he says in there that his ancestor was the son of Rabbi Pinchas the Levite, who brother of Aaron. Let's see what it says. Sorry. Rabbi Kiva Cohen's daughter married Yeshaya Horowitz, who's one of the big rabbis in the Horowitz family in the early 1600s. He was an offshoot of the tree of our Rabbi Isaac the Levite, who was the son of Rabbi Pinchas the Levite, the brother of Aaron, the prince of the Levites in Barcelona. Okay, so there's a very prominent, important Levi family in Barcelona, and one of them is known as the Prince of the Levites. And what happened was that one of the books of the Horowitz, Shmuel Horowitz here, printed in Krakow in 1617, called this ancestor also this Prince of the Levites. And so I think the descendant 200 years later saw this reference to Prince of the Levites and thought, okay, if Shmuel Horowitz is a Prince of the Levites and the Levis in Barcelona are Prince of the Levites, then we must be descended. And that's, I think, the origin of the myth. But as far as we can tell, the Horowitz family has nothing to do with any Sephardic family. I'm going to go quickly through these because everybody else wants to speak and I don't want to take too much time. Tone mentioned the Jews in Zamość. These were sent, originally the first emissaries were invited because Joseph Hanazi, who is a Sephardic Jew living in the Ottoman Empire, becomes very powerful, sends some emissaries to do business. And I think one of the issues we have is sort of why would someone move to Eastern Europe if you were a Sephardic Jew? The people who move tend to be rabbis, but no one wants a Sephardic rabbi in Eastern Europe. Business people, there's not that much business going on in Eastern Europe in most of this time period. And the third are doctors, and we're going to get to some examples of that. But these are all business people that move into Zamość. Already Meyer Balaban, who researched this in the early 1900s, determined that there's no trace of the early visitors after 1600. There are some Jews that are mentioned by Janina Morgenstern in her various articles in Polish on the Jews in Zamość that she identified up to about 1650. There are a few that enter in there, but there's just after that no trace of any of these families in that area, and so it's unlikely that any of the people who are claiming Sephardic ancestry descend from these families. And Tone already talked about this, about the various names. Note that in this area you had the Chelmitsky massacres in 1650, and so it became not an attractive place for Jews to do business, so there'd be no reason for these families to remain there. So there are, when I've talked about this before, some people have mentioned a few other families, and these I haven't determined whether it's true or not, and they deserve maybe some more attention. Maybe Alexander Bider has some more information on it, or Adam Brown. One is the Calahora family in Krakow and Posen. There are two branches. For some reason, I haven't figured out, Calahora also becomes Calafora or Calvary. I think most of the information about this family comes from a book published in 1870, which again is this sort of problematic time period where people are inventing Sephardic genealogies. You'd have to know Hebrew and Polish better than I do to do some research into this, but it deserves a closer look at this book, Toar Pene Shalomo, published in Potoshin in 1869 or 1870, because I believe that's the source for for most of the information about these family members, but there definitely was a Calahora family in Krakow and Posen, and they were doctors. So they studied in Italy, they get their doctoral degree, some teacher recommends them to a prince up in Krakow, and they become the personal physician for the prince or king up in Poland for a while. And there's some connection to the Delima family or Delemos. You have to look at it. It's all a little bit sketchy, but it is plausible, and you need to look at it. Whether the name changes make any sense, I'm not sure. Interestingly, the very respected and esteemed bibliographer Moritz Steinschneider has a note referring to Salmo aus Calahora, Ashkenazi. Okay, so for some reason he thought he was Ashkenazi. Maybe there's something in the Bodleian library that that someone can look at that would decide that. But anyway, there at least was some references to them that doubted the Sephardic character. If you go on to Jewish Gen, though, you can see some of these supposed variant names like Kolhori or Kolhari here. For example, in Krakow, there's a 74-year-old Abraham Anshul Kolhari who dies in 1817, right? So that's at least evidence of this Kolhori or Kolhari name. Whether that's the same name or not, maybe Alexander Bider has an opinion. Again, they think it's the same as Kalafori. I found a Kalafori in Hungary from Kasha, which is in Slovakia now. I'm not quite sure where that comes from. If you look up the variant Kalvari, you find a lot of them. There's some in Vilnius. Is Kalvari really a Sephardic name that comes from Calahora? I don't know. All I know is there's a place named Kalvari in Lithuania, which seems a much more likely source for that name in that area. So it's probably not related, is my guess. Then we have, I think this is my last example, the Portugal name. So also the Lubavitcher Rebbe claims to have a Portugal in his ancestry. So all of the people in that community believe they're descended from Sephardis. I'm not sure where the name develops. I found a pretty early one in Vienna. She dies in 1868, and it has her father's name pretty clearly on there, Israel Abraham Portugal. There seem to be a lot of families in Plotsk area worth looking at, but my suspicion, and maybe Alexander again will have an opinion on this, there are families who pick up these sort of toponym type names. A good example is the Englander family. There are a lot of Englanders all over Central Europe. Does that mean they came from England? Maybe not. Maybe it had something to do with the importing wares from England and selling them, trading issues. We're not quite sure where these names develop, whether they represent any movement of people or they're just adopted at the time. And so Portugal clearly could be one of those. If you look in Jewish Gen again, you see some Partigals in Kishinev area, Bessarabia, and that's the end. Okay, so I think I finished, and I'll hand it off to someone else. But I guess if I give a conclusion, it's that there is really no proven descent to a Sephardic family from any of these Eastern European families, and most of the ones that you hear about, whether it's Horowitz or Epstein, I know someone asked in the comments about Rappaport, it's an Italian family. Most of these legends are clearly false, and the ones that aren't clearly false are probably false. The end.
Thank you. Alexander, do you want to?
Yes. Hello. So I'm Alexander Bader. First of all, a few very theoretical points concerning this topic. So since I wrote a number of books in historical linguistics and Jewish dictionary of names, what I observed that often when people say that this name is related to another name, very often the two names are totally independent, and the only reason on which people base their conclusion is because these two names just have a few sounds in common. And this is actually common also not only for names, but even for languages. So very often you will find folk etymology papers or even books in which people discuss that this language is related to another language. But using this method, actually we can link any language of the world to any other language. So this is not specific to names. Now, second element is already, so sharing of some sounds can be sufficient to link some unrelated names. Second element is specific to names. If two names are not sounding alike, but they have the same meaning in two languages, often people can say that this is because one name is a translation of another. So like that, if we find, for example, some Spanish name, Spanish Jewish name, meaning, let's say, red, just any color, for example, and of course we will find some names in Eastern Europe with the same name, people can say this is because it was originally a Spanish name, but it was translated into Polish or into Russian, into Ukrainian, etc. Using this method, we can link any nation to any nation as well, because of course, for all cultures, last names often are based on the same concept. So, of course, in any nation, we will find names meaning main occupations, main nicknames concerning tall, small, big, white, black, etc. So, using this method, we can link any two, falsely, of course, link any two cultures. And something which is more specific to Jewish history is what I often observed when speaking with people, when discussing some elements with readers of my books, is oversimplification of settlement history. And so for Jewish history, what I also often observed is that if a name was present in Ottoman Empire or in Italy, people automatically think that this is Sephardic. And so they ignore that Italy, as it was already told by Ton, Italy was home for community for numerous communities that had nothing to do with medieval Iberia. So of course there was Sephardic community, but there also were Italian community unrelated to Spain. We were in the northern Italy Ashkenazi community. We were French community of French origin. So Italy is not someone from Italy is not necessarily Sephardic, and the same is true for the Ottoman Empire. Even if in the Ottoman Empire, of course, a large part of community members in Western Turkey and in Northern Greece were Sephardic, but not all, and many of them, many other members of these communities were not, at least on their paternal part, paternal line, were not Sephardic, but descendants of Byzantine Jews called Romagnots. Some were from France, some were from Middle Eastern Jews, some were Ashkenazim, but so at any case, Ottoman Empire does not mean Sephardic. When I wrote my book, a small book about Prague, I included a small section about Sephardic Jews in Prague. And actually, when I looked at it again now, I see that there are only two names. These persons were Ashkenazic already. They were members of the Ashkenazi community of Prague, but their name revealed that they, on their paternal line, they were Sephardic. So this name is Camondo, and another name is Cohen Fante, or just Fante. This is a shortened version of Belinfante. I also included in the book the name Bondi because it sounds close to Sephardic name bon dia, which is a good day. It's but when I was working on the book on Italy, I observed that Bondi was a very common Italian Jewish name, which was used by some Italian Jews without any link to Spain. Just it means good day in Italian dialects. And some families were Ashkenazic and other families were Italian, but not Sephardic. And of course, often a very false argument about the existence of Spanish synagogue in Prague. It was called Spanish just because of its kind of a type of architecture used. It was purely Ashkenazic synagogue. What about Eastern Europe? For Eastern Europe, when I compiled my 3 dictionaries of Jewish surnames from Russian Empire, from the Kingdom of Poland, and from Galicia, so the 3 areas in Eastern Europe where millions of Jews were present, in this etymological dictionary, I discussed also some names that have Sephardic roots. And so what can we say from the statistical point of view? In the Russian Empire dictionary, the total number of names is more than 74,000. I found about 30 names that may be of Sephardic origin, and of course their bearers were Ashkenazic Jews, but on their paternal line they had a Sephardic Jew to whom their name was because of whom their names was selected. What about Poland? Poland, less than 20 of 32,000 of names. For Galicia, less than 20 for 25,000 names. And so I prepared here a small sample of names that are really Sephardic. So they were counted in the previous slide. We find some Abarbanel in Poland and in Belarus. We find some Abugov in Russian, which is a Russified version of Abuov. We have in Eastern Belarus Abulafiev, which is Russified form of Abulafia. Agranat, same region, most likely, but not 100% sure, a change of Algranati. De Leon, Efrati, Caro, which is not 100% Sephardic, because, for example, the Prague family Caro was not Sephardic. The same name, but the name was not coming from the Spanish word meaning deer, but it was coming from the Aramaic word for someone who is reading Torah. So it's just a coincidence, just four letters, and I don't know whether the Caro, a small number of Caro families in Eastern Europe is related to the Prague family. If it is the case, in this case, they are Ashkenazic. If, on the other hand, we are related to some migrant from Ottoman Empire, in this case, they are really have Sephardic root. Concerning Zamość, the city in which the first community was purely Sephardic. It's not, of course, the majority came from Italy, but when the rules were formulated and the rights, the privilege were granted, it was explicitly said that this is for Sephardic Jews, not for Ashkenazic. And so Italian Jews who came there, they were not Ashkenazic Italian, they were not Italian, they were really Sephardic, and mainly they were Portuguese Jews who came there. But the community existed for just 100 years, and then it disappeared. And my first idea was that they left no traces. But then recently, a few years ago, I checked again the list that was shown previously by my colleagues of people who were members of this Sephardic community of Zamość in the 17th century, I found that not at least, but just one name survived, because in the same city of Zamość, we find in the 19th and the beginning of 20th century the name Castel, and actually it is, I think the odds are very high that it is Castel, the name that appears in the same Zamość a few centuries before. But this is the only exception, the only name that seems to survive. That means that its member, a bearer of this name, married some Ashkenazi woman, and then the family continued as Ashkenazic, but the name was kept. A few other examples: Kimchi, Kolhori is what Randolph mentioned, Calahora family, but this name was very rare, and was just one small family in Krakow that survived until the 20th century, but in no other place of Eastern Europe there were a single other member of this family was found. And three other examples are Curiel, Pinto, and Rosanes. There are also very few names that are not Sephardic names, not names used by Sephardic Jews, but the names themselves mean Portugal or Portuguese and Sfard. This is Ashkenazi pronunciation for Sephardim, and Spanier or Spanier. This is German or Yiddish for Spain and for someone from Spain. I do think that their first bearers were from the Ottoman Empire and then the Sephardic. It's not the same situation as for Englander or even Hollander or Francois, etc., because of the region where we find this. The name like Englander, so Englishman, Francois meaning Frenchman, Hollander meaning someone from a Dutch person. These names were common mainly in Galicia, where the Austrian Christian clerks assigned randomly names. And so someone who received the name Englander had no link at all with England, like someone who received the name Römer had no link to Rome, as someone who received the name Indianer was not someone from New World. So it was just a whim of Austrian clerk. But Portuguese and Portugal and Sfard and Spaniard, they appear in the Russian Empire, in the area where names were not invented by Christian clerks. And so I do think that someone from this family, some ancestor, really came from some Portuguese or some Sephardic community from most likely Italy or Ottoman Empire. And the last example is Don Yahia. This was a name that was taken at the beginning of 19th century by a rabbi from Latvia, who, according to his family tree, was told by his father, his grandfather, that he was descending from a Yahia family or Portuguese family that was very famous in the history of Sephardic Jews. And so for this reason, he took at the beginning of 19th century the name not Yahia, like his ancestors. True, false, I don't know. But he also added Don Yahia just to emphasize the Spanish links. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Adam, would you like to? Adam, you're muted.
So I've been busy scribbling down Sasha's interesting stuff and trying to go through my database as quickly as I could to respond to it. let me say I don't have slides for you. The other day we had a Zoom talk, and we had a technical problem with the Zoom, and I was amazed that upon remembering that for 40 years I practiced law without ever using Zoom, and made presentations to judges and boards and all kinds of people without Zoom. So today I'm going back to my roots, what I did before the epidemic, and I'm going to talk to you orally and try to paint a picture for you that is equally descriptive. So we have tested about over 12,000 men and women, and we've got over 8,000 Y chromosome tests we've done from every conceivable Jewish population in the world, from Afghanistan to Chile. And we have tested several thousand non-Ashkenazi men from everywhere. Afghanistan, Persia, Iraq, Yemen, all through Turkey. Got a couple hundred men in Turkey, Italy, everywhere. And, it's very hard to prove a negative about things. But I can, leaving aside the people who we strongly suspected to have Sephardi lineage, because as described by Sasha, they have Portuguese or Spanish surnames. And I'll look at a couple of yours in a sec. Aside from that, I mean, I'm more interested in the stuff that Tan's been working on and that Randy's been working on, which is, are there Sephardi descendants embedded with Ashkenazi names in the Ashkenazi community, which is really, I think, really what we're talking about. Someone who's named Curiel in Eastern Europe, I'll bet my bottom dollar that if they're not a pure old Christian Portuguese family, they're one of the 4 descendants of the family who left Portugal in the 17th century and settled in Lebanon, Turkey, and in Germany, that we wrote about a couple of years ago. I don't know if you guys have seen the article, but we wrote an extensive article about the Curiel family. That being said, one caveat I'd like to make is we can only test people whose lineages are alive today. So we can't comment on the people of Zamość if they don't have descendants who male descendants, living in the world. And that being such a small community, and Tan having identified only 2 families who are arguably Portuguese or Spanish in origin, one of the things about small families is they do run out of Y chromosomes. They run out of men. And, I can't tell you how many families we looked at before World War II in Amsterdam who had no descendants after World War II. And it's because simply the Galton effect, that you will run out of men in any family, any small family, over a limited number of centuries, So we have found Iberian Jews, specifically Portuguese, in every corner of the world. After 1497, in pulses, they left Portugal. Sasha has done some really great work. He gave a talk here at Sephardic World on the pulses of migration out of Iberia during different periods when the Inquisition became hotter. They would leave. But we have found them everywhere from Philippines to Hawaii to the Azores to the Cape Verde Islands to here on Martha's Vineyard. I DNA tested a friend who was from a very well-known Sephardi lineage. So we've been able to detect the ones who left anytime after 1391. We see the first pulse out in 1391. We see the men who went to Morocco. We can see them around the world, the Iberians. We can see them all across North Africa, into Aleppo particularly, Salonika, of course, and to a limited extent in other communities. We see them in Tunisia. We see them in the people who pass through Livorno. And we see them in some parts of Africa. I was interested to see that Angola comment by Tan in the listing of the bands of marriage. We have found the Sephardi Y chromosome in Mozambique and in Angola. But these families knew it. I mean, this was not a surprise to them. Typically, when we have tested families, and I'm always happy to be proven wrong, typically when we've tested Ashkenazi families with Ashkenazi identity, who think they have Iberian origins after 1391, we typically find that that's not true or not proven. We have plenty of we have plenty of men who have Y chromosomes that separated out from Iberia between 1,000 and 1,500 years ago, during the formation of the Proto-Ashkenazi population, of which Dr. Bader is the world expert, in my opinion, based on his analysis of the Yiddish language and the development of the Yiddish language. But we're not seeing it at all. I mean, we're seeing French people going into early Proto-Ashkenaz. We're seeing people from the Mediterranean. We're seeing Spaniards. It's clearly that there was a Spanish origin to many of our largest Ashkenazi lineages based on the DNA. The DNA speaks quite loudly. What's interesting is the converse, which is we find plenty of non-Ashkenazi Y chromosomes in the Eastern European population. What we find is that almost as a rule, they have no idea of any origin other than their Ashkenazi origins. Zero. Randy did an interesting discovery about that with relation to the community of the Hungarian community after the departure of the Ottomans, and when they were arrested by the Habsburgs, I believe, and then redeemed by the Jewish community of Vienna. You can nod your head, Randy, if that's your recollection of that narrative, and that these people were brought into the Ashkenazi community, and we really see no evidence of them today, other than they know that they have some kind of Ashkenazi lineage. In almost every case, they're not. I'm sorry, Sephardi lineage. In every case, they're actually Ottoman. They're actually Romaniote lineages. They're not really. We're not seeing any evidence of Iberian Jewish origins in the post-1391 period. Some of the ones, Sasha, you're absolutely right about Curiel, De Leon, Pinto. You're absolutely right. These are without doubt Sephardi, Iberian Sephardi New Christian lineages. Some of them I'm not so sure about, like Kimchi and Abulafia. They really look to us like Romaniote lineages, and that's something I'll be happy to discuss with you. I think we should explore it a little bit. You and I have never had a chance to compare notes on this, but we have just about every major Sephardi family in the world has been tested by us, and I think we might learn some things talking together. But to make a long story short, the only place where we're finding clear signals of new Christian lineages in the eastern part of Europe are among Christian families. And I think Miss Bellum is on the call. We did find a family in Sweden with a made-up Swedish surname. I mean, I discussed it with Thomas First, who said this is definitely not a Swedish surname. This is like, Joe Smith or John Doe. What's interesting about that particular family is they're a match for David Silvera. Okay. So David, you have someone who wandered away from probably from Amsterdam into the Baltic and into Sweden at some time, probably in the 17th or 18th century. And I'd love to get to the root of it because two members of that family were DNA tested, so they must have some interest in the subject. So between Thomas and Ms. Bellum, I think we should be able to get to the root of that. The other one is Belinfante. The Belinfantes we know show up in Amsterdam, but they sure look to us like Romaniote in origin. They look like a Balkan lineage to us. So be happy to discuss that with you. They're a particularly famous family. They're famous in this country because of one of their descendants turned out to be one of the world's great calypso singers. But they did settle in the Caribbean, but they don't look to us like a Iberian lineage. So there's a lot to be learned by comparing these notes. In sum, we see a lot of smoke, but we're not seeing any fire in terms of what we've been able to discover in terms of embedded Sephardi families with Ashkenazi surnames in Eastern Europe or Central Europe. And I won't get into the Italians. That's a whole different mess. Okay, the Italians are an amalgam of everybody. Romaniote, Ashkenazim, a little sprinkling of Sephardi. And so and of course their own Italki origins which they all claim date back to right, the Roman era. So everyone's got a claim. And my general philosophy is if you believe you're descended from Moshe Rabbeinu, fine with me. Okay, you're descended from Moshe Rabbeinu. I don't argue with any of these cultures, but they all have a very clean culture that fits into history. And if there's one thing we've learned after 12 years, I think I've been doing this now 26 years, there is no one fits in. There's no clean story for any lineage. Each lineage has its own narrative and its own history. Just like the Shoah, right? Anyone who survived had their own unique story for how they survived the Shoah. And everyone who's in the Jewish community today has their own unique story for how they survived, 3,000 years, each one quite different. So that's long and short of it. Thanks.
Thank you. We've already been going an hour. I won't show slides. I'll just summarize what I was going to say, which is this should really just be a subject for obscurantists such as ourselves. But of course, the Spanish and Portuguese nationality laws have made it a more popular issue. And of course, a lot of people have applied for citizenship in those countries on the belief or the claim of having Sephardic ancestry from Ashkenazi backgrounds. The people sitting in judgment are perhaps not as committed to the genealogical standards as we are. And so it's entirely possible now that a number of new citizens in Spain and Portugal are sort of Ashkenazi of believed Sephardic ancestry, rather than having followed the rigorous academic paths of everyone here. And I think that's the safest thing to say, rather than talking about a particular community or businessman where people might be a little bit litigious. That being said, thank you very much to all our speakers. Does anyone have any comments or questions? Can you raise your hand? We can't actually see everyone on the screen, so maybe if anyone has a question, you would just unmute yourself. Everyone's been stunned into silence. Oh, Liz, yeah, please. You need to
Please unmute yourself.
I have a comment, if I'm available, if it's available for me.
Yes.
We have an interesting congregation in New Orleans. It's an Orthodox congregation called Antisvard. And I often wondered why it was an Ashkenazi congregation. I was told, and now I'm questioning it, that the founders were from Lithuania. So maybe they weren't. I don't know. I don't know.
They were Hasidim.
What? Right. They were Sephardic, and they were not.
They were not Sephardic.
Then why did they call the congregation Antisvard?
Because I guess it was cool. They were not Sephardim. There were no Sephardim who were Hasidim.
I have an answer to that.
Okay.
In 1700, a group of Ashkenazim from Eastern Europe, consisting of what were people who were later to become Hasidim, went to Israel. It didn't go well, and they went back, and they took with them Kabbalah and the love for the Sephardic rites. And these Hasidim in Eastern Europe celebrated services according to the Hasidic, to the Sephardic rites, which I'm sure consisted of a few songs, maybe a few prayers, and things that they got from books.
Interesting. When I was a teenager, I would go to bar mitzvahs there, and of course, as you know, my family's been at the Touro Synagogue in New Orleans for 140 years. So I was not exposed to that except when I went to bar mitzvahs as a teenager. And I just found it fascinating. And then I'm just telling you what I was told. I don't know enough about it. I don't know enough about the congregation, but I'm glad you all clarified this. Thank you.
My understanding, so sorry, Liz, just to jump in, is that the Sephardim follow the Shulchan Aruch. The Ashkenazim follow a variant of that, and some Ashkenazim adopted what they call the Nusach Safad to try and get closer to the original, and that's, I think, mostly Hasidim and some Hungarian Jews, but I'm really no expert on that.
Okay, thank you all.
Yeah, following Sephardic rite doesn't mean that you have Iberian ancestors.
Right. So sorry, Liz, over to you.
Okay. Here's one question to Mr. Schoenberg, Randall Schoenberg. I was wondering what was the importance for the Ashkenazi families to invent stories that they were from Sephardic ancestors?
Yeah, I mentioned that book by John Ephron at the beginning that talks about the allure of the Sephardic, and it's just such a sort of well-documented and common thing that, unlike Alexander, I think the presumption has to be that all these names are invented in order to establish some sort of fake Sephardi connection, absent some real proof, because time and again when we investigate, it turns out that the connection is invented, and it's just, there's if you have dark hair, for example, and someone say, "Oh, you look like you're a Portuguese Jew," and by the time that story gets heard by the little kids and then passed down to their kids, it was, "Oh, grandmother was a Portuguese Jew," right?
Oh yes, yes, I can imagine. That it must have been interesting, but the importance was it because they thought that the Portuguese were rich and
yes. So
okay.
At least as early as the beginning of the 1800s, there was this sort of myth about Spanish Jews were well connected, because of course there were few, just as there were in German areas, there were few highfalutin Spanish Jews that hung out with princes and kings and had a lot of money and land.
Yes, of course, yes.
Doesn't mean that the average Jew in Spain was anything like that, but that was the story that was being told in the Ashkenaz world, right? So there was some sort of cachet to being Sephardic. And then you add to that what Tone was talking about in Amsterdam, where they were again sort of the wealthier part of the community, which reinforced this, that they had some sort of advantage.
Okay.
So I think it's clear, and also you have to remember, in religious communities you get a lot of, I don't want to call it fanaticism, but there's a lot of imaginary things that happen. People become their false messiahs and things like that. So imagine millions and millions of Jews over 10, 12 generations. There's going to be one who says, "Hey, I'm an Abulafia, okay? I'm a Barbanel," right? All those Barbanels and the Barbanels in Eastern Europe, like, no way. But it's just, someone read an old Jewish book about an old Jewish rabbi in Spain and decided that's what I want to be. And I have to counter Alexander on this. Englanders are not just in Galicia; they're in Bohemia, where they were not giving names by clerks. They're in Hungary and Slovakia, right? So Englanders are all over the place. Why are there Englanders? I don't believe for a minute that the Fanta are anything. Bel Infante and all that craziness. It's just not true, as far as I can tell. Unless you can prove it to me, I'm going to assume it's not true, because every time I scratch, it's fake.
Okay, thank you so much.
I can add something. It was my hypothesis that Fanta is Sephardic, and so then since this name does not appear in any Sephardic source, I thought that it is a shortened form on Bel Infante. And so before to check this, all Belinfante are always Kohanim, so Kohen Belinfante. And so what I did, I went to the book about the Prague cemetery, and what I found, Kohen Fante. So I think the coincidence, and Fante is not found in any other Ashkenazi community. So I'm at least 90% sure that it is the same as Kohen. Kohen Fante is the same as Kohen Belinfante. Now, for your question, I think it's a question of really, as Randolph said, of social prestige. And so in Jewish mentality, globally speaking, there was one medieval golden age. Golden age was in Spain until, according to the myth, until 1492. Actually, it ended in 1391, because during the last 100 years, it was a very, it was not a golden age for Spanish Jewry. But in the collective imagination, it is a golden age. And for a German Jewry, there were no golden age like that. And so in European history and the, for example, Wissenschaft und Judentum by German Jewish scholars, they, at the beginning of 19th century, for them, Sephardim were much more glorious than Ashkenazic. And so this is why they introduced the idea that Sephardic reading of Hebrew is the correct one and the Ashkenazic is the bad one. And so there is a lot of things about this, but this is always a question of social prestige, myth, etc. And so this is why it is much more prestigious to have a Sephardic ancestor rather than Ashkenazic.
Well, honestly, I have to tell you, my mother was Sephardic and my father was from Germany, and she was always very proud that she had Portuguese ancestors. She always told me. So I can imagine that it was social.
And exactly, I have some colleagues from Morocco, Muslims. And so I told for them, and some of them say that on some of their lineages, they descend from Muslims that were expelled from Spain. And so for them, this is a glorious golden age, exactly the same. And I found this for Tunisian as well. So these people, when they came to Morocco, to Tunisia, they continued to be the proud descendants of some period which was golden age, and of course much more cultural, etc., in comparison to local. So this is psychology.
Yes, I totally understand. Yes. I have another question for Adam Brown.
Judy's hand has been raised for a long time.
Oh, sorry.
She wants to speak or not, but there she is.
I would like to speak. Thank you. One question is, how accurate is the family tree DNA? I have, according to them, I have like 2 to maybe 3% Sephardic ancestry, and I have a DNA match with Penso family from Turkey. I wanted to know how accurate that might be.
Okay, good question. First question I have for you is, how remote is the Penso connection? How do they describe it?
They don't. I mean, I haven't investigated it. I did find a Dr. Penso from Turkey who moved with his family to Los Angeles. I contacted him and his son, and they didn't respond to me.
Okay, first of all, Judy, if you're connected,
that was DNA match that came up.
If your connection is 2%, he won't know anything. He won't know anything about it because that's probably 200 years ago.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thanks for telling that.
But that's certainly evident. Is that the only match you have with a non-Ashkenazi surname?
I'm connected to actually David Mendoza, right here, and I don't know if it's and some of his relatives, and that's a much closer match, but I'm not sure if that's on his Ashkenazi or Sephardic side.
Okay, so like 2% is 1/25 of your ancestry. So you can do, it's like probably
Nothing.
it's 4 generations ago. It's meaningful,
Okay.
but it's 4 generations ago. And actually, to me, the Penso match is more interesting to me than the percentage. So the other problem you have, of course, is that gentleman named Penzo may have a grandmother who's Ashkenazi or a great grandmother who's Ashkenazi, and you match him through an Ashkenazi line, not a Sephardi line. So I don't, I find autosomal sort of fun, and it helps me tease out some hidden results. I'll give a perfect example. If we get a man with a unique Y chromosome that we've never seen before, that's very unusual in an Ashkenazi man. But we will do an autosomal test just to make sure we're not looking at some guy from Trinidad and Tobago. So if we do a DNA test on the fellow, and we then do an autosomal, and we see he's got a Jewish Y chromosome and a 100% Ashkenazi, or I'm sorry, non-Jewish Y chromosome with a 100% Ashkenazi autosomal, we know that whatever issue is not lately. Okay, it's got to be at least 4 or 5 generations ago if there was a Y chromosome that entered the Jewish population. So, and then conversely, we find men with non-Jewish, solidly Jewish Y chromosomes who have solidly non-Jewish autosomal, and that just means a conversion that occurred out of Judaism, centuries ago. Both of those are very common. Both of those situations. So there you have it.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Yep.
Thank you.
And Liz, you had a question?
Oh, yes. I have a question, but it's about the Avoitano DNA project.
That's it. And the guy.
Yes, I know you're the guy. The thing is that my ancestors from the 17th century came from Italy.
Mhm.
And I recently discovered a cousin, Mervyn Del Monte, and he participated in your project. He sent his DNA, how do you say
Yeah, so he sent a kit.
yes, the beginning of April. So we're curious if what our lineage is, because you're telling about the road.
I'll take a look. Where the Belmonte family, his lineage came, we find the name in different places. His lineage came from Italy?
Yes.
Okay. So I will take a look. If you will send me your email in chat,
Yes,
you can put me together with him.
Yes.
And we'll talk about it together. I'm not sure it's in yet. Sometimes Y-DNA takes its own path, but
Yes.
I'll certainly take a look at it. Okay, we typically do not reach out to people until before we publish, but I'm happy to do it when asked.
That would be great. I just sent you my email.
I got it right here. Thank you,
Yeah.
Liz.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Doris, you have your hand up.
Yes, I found this whole presentation very interesting. On the list of names of the supposed Sephardic Jews in Zamość, I saw the name of Pinto. I'm very interested in Pinto and Pintos. My family name was Pintos, and we always, various diverse members of the family believed they were Sephardim, or they had a Sephardic connection. We also use the, I think I chatted with Adam for a while.
Definitely Sephardi. Definitely Sephardi. No question about it. It's a
Pinto.
Sephardi. Pinto, yes.
So how would Pinto be in this list? Do you have any more details on this particular family?
Well, Sasha found it, and it was on his list. And we've tested a number of Pintos, and they all match each other. And they come from a single family that has real connections to the Sephardi community. We see other men with different surnames that are clearly Sephardi in origin to whom they match. So that's how we know. And we know that their Y chromosome connection was quite recent in Iberian history. So this is not a situation where where an Iberian family joined the Ashkenazi community. These are people who are closely packed together with different surnames, all of whom have that history, and no one without that history. So that's how again, it's all, studies are always an approximation, right? We're trying to get as close as we can to the truth, but we're always ready to be awakened by something that proves us completely wrong. But yes, Pinto, I would classify as one of Dr. Bader's lineages that he's correctly identified as a Sephardian origin, Iberian Sephardi.
Well, can I get any more information about this Pinto family in Zamość?
That will be very difficult, I think. It's just a name on the list.
It does not appear later. This is the only occurrence of this name Pinto in Zamość, and in all other centuries, no reference to Pinto in Zamość. So all we know about Pinto is mainly from the Ottoman Empire and from other places with multiple Sephardic communities. So this is a typical Portuguese Iberian name.
Yeah.
With an unusual route through Poland.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Has anyone else got any questions or points?
Okay, we'll wrap it up. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. Thank you to our contributors tonight, Wendy and Adam and Alexander. It's been wonderful and to hear evidence given from various viewpoints, from names, from DNA, from Amsterdam, and it all comes to the same conclusion. I think that's rare. So we hope to see you again in 2 weeks' time. We do have a speaker. Maybe David is better acquainted with him than I am. Otherwise, good night and see you in 2 weeks. And thanks to our patrons.